Hello and welcome to Web Intersect 2.0 Social Network Website Production Series Part 7. In this part we will cover the login mechanics, redirecting the user to a placeholder profile page if their login is successful. We will also cover the Logout Script in this video, and we will create a module for verifying the user in situations where you must double check their credentials before running some code. Before we do those things, we're going to very quickly edit just a couple of lines of code from the last Web Intersect video number 6. Because I was in a hurry and I forgot to initially make database fields to store the unique salts and a reference token separate from the encrypted hash. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm the world's leading authority on PHP password encryption, because I'm not. Nor do I wish to spend any more time covering password encryption. I just know my fair share. I've done my fair share of experiments and reading. That's it. So in light of that, and just so we can move along with creating other software systems for the social network, I've decided to give you all of the information on this whole password encryption matter direct from the horse's mouth, and just let you guys decide for yourselves individually. Okay, here's the page, the URL that I want you to go to at the PHP official documentation manual. And you should just really listen to what they recommend. So it says safe password hashing. This section explains the reasons behind using hashing functions to secure passwords, as well as how to do so effectively. So you have, why should I hash my passwords supplied by users of my application? Why are common hashing functions such as MD5 and SHA-1 unsuitable for passwords? And you can see that they recommend crypt and hash over MD5 and SHA. So you guys just read all of this. You can read about what a salt is, read all the user-supplied comments, and just do some general Googling to get yourself in the know about password or general data encryption, or whenever you need to secure some data on your website. Now I can show you guys ways, but like I said, I'm not a password encryption top expert, but I can show you ways to complexify MD5 and SHA. Basically, you can render out an MD5 hash and chop it up into little pieces and disperse it all throughout a very long string, and nobody will ever know where those little segments of the actual hash are living within that string. So there are things you can do in a custom sense to complexify MD5 and SHA, but you guys should just go with what they recommend, crypt or hash, for securing user passwords. And there's also, I think WordPress uses some popular PHP password hashing mechanism, and you can look into what WordPress is using for that. So since I forgot to initially make database fields to hold unique salts and tokens for each user's password encryption, this lesson series will just use basic MD5 hash so that we can continue without me having to go back to video 1. So now, go into signup.php, and somewhere around line 73, we're going to comment this out or just remove them altogether. You see where we're generating phash, the password hash, from the crypt function. We're going to remove that and just add this line. So we have phash MD5 on the password, and that will hash the password before it gets inserted into the database. Now this is a very basic and not the most secure way to hash a password for secure storage in your system. So me putting this in place will assure that you guys all do your homework on your own and you come up with your own unique way of salting your encrypted passwords. So if I'm not offering a method for you guys to secure your passwords, you will not have any security problems if people know that you're running software that's based off of the Web Intersect tutorial series. If somebody happens to see that you might be running your system based off of this software series, they won't know what kind of password encryption method you're using at all. So while you're in production, if you just want to see all your systems working, go along with the tutorial series with me. You can use MD5 for now, and later on when you become a super expert in PHP password encryption, then you go back and change it. Just make your system a little more secure. I gave you all of the information. You can go and read it yourself, and all you got to do is really Google. So make sure you go into signup.php and change that like I just did. Now the next line I want you to change is within activation.php. So open up activation.php and go to the section where it says evaluate the lengths of the incoming get variables. Change this one to if string length p is not equal to 74, because ours won't be equal to 74 anymore. So you can just say if p is equal to nothing. So you just want to check and see if it's empty. And later on, when you complexify your system, you can change this to maybe match a certain exact length like we were doing before. Okay, so if you've changed signup.php and activation.php, your system will work now with the login script that I'm about to show you. And then after you complexify your password storage mechanisms, you would also alter your login script. And you'll want to replace activation.php and signup.php on your server right now. Now before we can continue, you have to go into your database, go into phpMyAdmin, and you want to empty the users table. Just click empty right there, truncate users, OK, and then empty the user options table as well. So that way you're back to a clean slate, okay? And also be very sure that you go right now into your folder system online, into the users folder, and remove any of the dummy folders or the test account folders that were created when you signed up. And then when you remove that folder, go ahead and sign up again to your site. Navigate to signup.php and run through the process again. And get yourself as a user in the system once again. Alright, so I got the message, okay Adam, check your email inbox. Now go ahead and make a few more dummy accounts. Make about 3 or 4 different dummy accounts using different email addresses. This way you'll have a few different users within your system to see how things work, especially when you go to create your friends system and things like that. You'll want to have multiple dummy users in there to do some testing. So make several accounts right now. Alright, so when you click the link within your activation email, you'll see activation success and your account is now activated. Click here to log in. So you see now we have the login page up, and this is what we're going to be explaining within this video. So this one is similar to the sign up page. It uses Ajax, and if you don't put data in, you click that, it says fill out all the form data. You can go ahead and put in your data. And the forgot password link is not established yet because that script is coming a little bit later in the series. So I'm going to put in my credentials and then press login. And upon successful login, I'm ushered to my profile page, which is user.php, which I'm going to be giving you all the code for. And it's just a basic default placeholder page for now, which we're going to expand later on. But I just wanted to show you how after they log in, you can redirect them directly to their profile if you want. And we have our module in place that verifies the user in certain situations where you want to double check their credentials before you show them things or give them certain profile options. So it says, is the viewer, the page owner, logged in and verified? It says yes. So if you were viewing this profile right now, you're not logged in as Adam, so this would say no. So with that logic, you can give the user, if this is yes, you can give the user profile editing buttons and things like that normal users viewing their profile would never see. Okay? So you'll be getting that login script, you'll be getting and actually there's a logout script. Let me show you how that works. I'm just going to go to logout.php, but you'll have links to it eventually. I'm just going to go directly to it, logout.php, and you can do the same while you're in production. And you see it logged me out and put me back at the home page of Web Intersect. Now if I try to go to user Adam, it says, is the viewer, the page owner, logged in and verified? No, because I'm not logged in anymore. I just logged out. So the logout script works, and you'll get your hands on that within this video as well. So all that's left now is to discuss the code really quickly from these new 4 files that you're going to be receiving. Okay, the first file you will receive is login.php. Now let's explain the login form. Now some people like to make a login form just in a box that magically appears somewhere near the header. For some people you'll see they'll have in the header of their site 2 fields where the user can log in directly. But I'm just going to have a separate page with a login form on it. After you get really good at web development, you can just put your form wherever you want it. It doesn't have to be on its own separate page. Okay, so the login form, you can see it has ID of login form. And on submit we have return false. That way it doesn't process in the normal way because it's going to be Ajax processing. So let's open this up and check out the fields. The first input field we have is for their email address. And in the onFocus event, when the user goes to put the cursor in and type into the field, that's when the onFocus event fires off. You want to empty the status element. The status element is down here, and that's the element that all the error handling and messages to the user as they're filling out the form, that's where those messages will go. So if their login is unsuccessful, the message goes there. So when they go to put the cursor back in those fields in the onFocus event, you want to empty out that message because they're trying to fix whatever the problem was. So you don't need that message there anymore, so you empty the element status. And you can see the same happens for the password field. And I should remove all the max lengths. And I think on the sign up form I had a max length on the password. You really shouldn't have a max length. Let's go ahead and give that 100. That way the passwords can be really long. Here, look, I'm going to open signup.php. I'm going to go down into the form in that one too. And I think, see, for the password, what do we have? See, max length. Change that to 100 or 200, whatever. So you don't have to really restrict the length of their password, since it's all going to be hashed anyway to a certain bit length. And then you have the login button, which in the onClick event fires off the JavaScript function login, and that's where your Ajax is. I'm going to show you that login function in just a second. That's sitting right here. And then the last thing in the form is a little link to your forgot password page, or whatever, your forgot password form, and that you can just stick in the URL to that when we make it later on. So you don't really even have to have that link in there, but I just went ahead and put it in there because we're going to be sticking a URL in there pretty soon. Alright, so you see that's the whole stinking login form. And here up in the head tag you have some CSS that's styling that login form. Very basic stuff. So let's talk about that login function. Okay, now function login works exactly the same way that our function signup did on signup.php. All we do is we scoop up the variables from the form fields. So you're scooping up the value of each form field and you're putting it into a local JavaScript variable. Then you're saying if the email variable or the password variable is empty, then you want to put into the status field, fill out all of the form data. Else, if the email and the password do have values, then you can go ahead and process the form with Ajax. So the login button, you just want to give the style display none or visibility hidden property, whichever way you want to go about hiding or disabling your login button while Ajax is processing. Then for the status element, you want to put in the inner HTML, please wait, because that's when the Ajax mechanism is about to occur. So we run our Ajax mechanism. You can see down here we're sending two variables, E and P, which represent email and password, to the PHP script. In our case, we're posting to login.php, just like we did with signup.php. And I'll say it again, like I said it before, you can take this PHP code that processes this Ajax and put it in an external separated file if you want. But since this login.php is the only page that is going to need this PHP script, I see it makes good sense to just have it live directly in this script. Okay, so when the data comes back from PHP, we're going to check to see if the Ajax response text is equal to login failed. Then we want to put in the status div that login was unsuccessful, please try again. And you want the login button to come back. So whatever way you made the login button go away or be disabled or be invisible, you want to bring it back at that point. So if the Ajax response text is not equal to login failed, else you're going to run window.location and just usher the user to their profile page, which is user.php with a URL variable of u, and it's going to be equal to this user's name. So I made the PHP script spit back, just if the login is successful, just spit back the user's name, and that's what you put on the end of this variable. That way the user will be ushered to their particular profile upon successful login. And you can send them to any page you want with any variables you want attached. You can handle that any way you like. So that's all of the JavaScript. And now all we have to do is explain the PHP, which is very, very simple. So in this page, login.php, I opted to check their session to see if they happen to be logged in. So maybe a logged in user might just type in login.php. Even if you don't have any links to it, they might just type in login.php, and then they'll navigate to your login page and they're already logged in. And that doesn't make any sense because they're already logged in. Why would they want to be on that page? So I just usher them away to their user profile. Now here we have another PHP block, and this one I wrote a little comment that says Ajax calls this login code to execute. So when people come to the login.php page, this code isn't going to execute unless they fill out the form and press login. then this code executes, and Ajax calls it to run. Let's open that up, and we say if is set the posted variable of e, which is email, then we'll know that the form is being submitted and we can execute this code. So the first thing we do is connect to the database using our include file for the database connection. Then we gather the posted data into local variables and sanitize them. So we get e scooped up into local variable by using MySQL real escape string function on it to sanitize the posted e variable. And for the password variable, all you do is simply hash that using whatever encryption method that you decided upon. So this line makes it match what's in the database so we can do a comparison. Then you get the user IP address, and I'm going to be talking to you guys about how you can use the user IP address for security reasons. So just leave this line in here for now. Even though we might not have the mechanism for security in place, we'll put it in place later, and I'll discuss it with you guys later. But you want to keep updating the user's IP address in the database every time they log in. Now they form data error handling, which we do in JavaScript, but we're going to also do it in PHP in case anybody bypasses our JavaScript. So we just check to see if the email and password actually have values. If they don't, we just echo login failed and exit. Else, if the values are there, you can go ahead and check for a match in the database. So you set up your SQL syntax that reads select ID, username, and password from the users table where email equals this person's email address. So we're selecting their ID, the username, and password where the email matches what the user's typing in. Then we run that MySQL query here. We put it in a variable called query. So then we can MySQL fetch that row from the database for the user's ID, username, and password. And then we put those row variables here into local variables here that say database ID, database username, and database password string. And you can see we're just accessing the row as an array and getting the little indexes that we need. We know the first thing we selected was the ID, so that'll be 0. The second thing was username, that'll be 1. Third thing was password, and that'll be 2 in the array. And that's how you can access those fields. And then you run an if condition that says if the password that the user is typing in, if that is not equal to their stored hash for their password, then you want to echo login failed. Because what they're typing in as their password in the login form does not match what you have on file. Else, if their password that they're typing in does match the password that you have on file for that user that has that email address, then you run this code, which essentially logs them in. First, you create their sessions and cookie files. Session and cookie files are files that get created on the user's browser software. Within the user's browser software, well, really it's stored on the user's computer in their temp folder somewhere. But the browser, whatever software they're using to browse the web with, that's what actually creates the cookie or the session file. Now, sessions are short-lived files only while the user's browser is open. For instance, if we only made sessions here and we didn't set any cookies down here, every time the user closed their browser, came back the next day, they'd have to log back in. But if you set cookies, your site automatically just remembers them. And in my login form, I'm not going to put a box that says remember me checkbox. My site's just going to automatically remember them. But if you want to be on the up and up, you can put the little checkbox that says remember me. That way the user has the option of telling your system to go ahead and create cookie files. And then finally you update their IP address and their last login fields in the database. So you update users set IP and last login field. For the last login field, you can just specify now in SQL syntax, which will give you the current timestamp, where username is equal to this particular unique user in the database. And we put limit 1 because we only want to update one row in the database. And then here we actually run that query, and we echo back to the login form Ajax the database username, and then we exit. Okay, so once the username is echoed back, you exit that script, and then JavaScript Ajax takes back over right here, and you window location the user to their profile. And that is all there is to login.php. Okay, now let's quickly discuss Logout.php. First thing you do is session start. That way you can work with your session variables within the script. And remember, session start has to go the first line, the very top of your file. It's recommended that you have session start be really the first line within your PHP if you're going to use session start. For instance, you shouldn't have extra PHP blocks or white space up above this. It should be just like that. You open your PHP block and you put session start directly. You really don't want to have session start anywhere else because it could lead to problems for you. Now here we set the session data to an empty array. Then we expire their cookie files. And if you guys want to really learn about set cookie and how to set your sessions, you just check the PHP manual. Anytime you see in any of these scripts that we're working with any of these PHP built-in functions like set cookie, session destroy, header, you see all these functions, you can just go to that PHP manual that I showed you earlier in this video and put in the search box the function name, and you can learn in depth all about it. Read all the user contributed notes, and you can really master PHP that way by using the PHP manual directly. That way you get PHP coding straight from the horse's mouth, and you're not listening to other douchebags like me. So basically all we're doing is setting the cookie to a time in the past, 5 days ago. That will expire their cookie. Then you're going to destroy the session variables by running the session destroy function. Then the last thing, and this is optional, you can just double check to see if their sessions exist anymore. You say if is set session username. Then you can header them to message.php with a message of error logout failed, or you can just echo to the page here logout failed. But this really should never occur. You'll have this else condition header them to the home page of your website upon successful logout. You can header them to any URL that you want upon successful logout. And that's all there is to logout.php. Okay, now let's quickly discuss the code at work inside of checkloginstatus.php. Checkloginstatus.php is a file that you are going to make live inside of your PHP includes folder on the server. It's not going to be in your public HTML. It'll be with all of your include files. So you put it with your PHP include files in that folder. Now basically the whole gist of this whole file is to have a module that you start session in, the top line always of every script that you're going to use it in. So that means if you are going to include this file check login status into any other scripts, it has to be the first line. You include it into the first line of any other scripts because you want to run session start first line in all of your scripts. Then you include the database connection. So what this means is files that include this file at the very top of them, they would not require connection to the database because it's already connected, and they won't require session start because it's already in place here. So you be careful. If you're going to include checkloginstatus.php into any pages, which we are, into user.php. So if you're going to include this into user.php, you certainly don't want to have a connection to your database in that, and you don't want to have session started at the top because you're already starting the session by including check login status into user.php in the very top. Then we'll simply initialize some variables, and down here in the bottom is where we are checking to see if they're logged in or not. So basically what you want to do is check to see if their session variables are set, and if they are, you're going to run this code. Now maybe they're opening their browser and coming back a week later to your site and their session variables aren't set yet, but their cookies are set. Then you want to run this code to see, else if their cookies are set, you run this code here. So if their sessions are set, you run this code. If their cookies are set, you run this code. But most of the time when they're browsing your site, their sessions will be set, and this first if condition will be picked up and this code will run, and only really when they come back from not visiting the site for a day or a week would this else condition run. I'll explain this function, evaluate logged user, in just a second. Okay, so if their session variables are set, we are going to take their session variables and sanitize them, because people can change what their session files say. They can change their cookie files basically using certain software. And since people can put in any kind of strings they want into these session files, you don't ever want to query your database without sanitizing session or cookie data. Since the end user can manipulate all of that data, you want to make sure it's sanitized before it touches your database at all. So that's why we're using preg replace here, to make sure that the user's ID only has and only is allowed numbers in the value. You want to check that log username only has letters and numbers. And the same thing for the log password, that it only has letters and numbers, since we're using MD5, because MD5 hash only makes a letter and number hash. If you're using a more complex hash and salting method, you would want to make sure that you allow, for instance, the $sign, or if you're going to have dot, underscores in your strings, make sure you allow those by putting those symbols in. But mine is not. It's only going to have uppercase and lowercase letters and numbers in it. So basically you're taking the session data if their sessions are available. If your system recognizes that their session files are available, you're taking those session file data and you're putting it into local PHP variables called log ID, log username, log password. Then after you get those into local variables, you're going to run the function called eval logs user up here, and you're going to feed it 4 variables: the database connection variable, the person's ID, the person's username, and the person's password. Those are all 4 going to be sent to the eval logged user function right here. And that is all of that section for if their session variables are already set. Now you can see that I have user OK as the name of the variable that holds the value of the output of this function. And up here we initialize that with a value of false. So if it's a visitor that's not a member of your site, that's not logged in or anything, basically they'll always be user OK false. Okay, so since we're running this function here, eval logged user, let me explain that real quick before I explain the cookie section. So in eval logged user, what you want to do is set up your SQL syntax to read select IP address from the users table where the ID equals this user's session ID, and where the username equals this user's session username, and where the password equals this user's session password, and where the activated equals 1. So basically that's how you make the match logic. You want to see if their session data matches something on file. That way you're double checking to make sure that user is who they say they are. So as long as you make sure your site doesn't allow cross-site scripting attacks, you're fine. And the system I'm going to give you all the way through the end of production, there's nowhere in that system, in this system that I'm producing here, that someone can put in malicious JavaScript code and conduct cross-site scripting attacks. Furthermore, there will be nowhere in this system where somebody can perform MySQL injection. So we're safe. So this eval logged user function runs really just as a double check mechanism, just to make sure that nobody's playing around trying to impersonate somebody else by simply opening their cookie files and changing the values to some other user's name or something like that. That any kid could do that. Any kid could open up their cookie files and change the value of them. So if everything is a nice match, then you're going to run that query and get a numRows result from that using the MySQL numRows function. And you can evaluate that numRows result and check to see if it is greater than 0. Then you can return true. That means if everything matched up and the user is authenticated, then you can return true to the line that called this function to run. And the line that called this function to run is right here, user OK. So basically user OK, if everything works out and the user is authenticated, this is going to have a value of true. Otherwise, if they're not, it's going to remain with a value of false. Okay? So let me collapse this back up. And all we have to do is show you now the part of the code that runs only if the user is maybe coming back from a week later of not visiting your site for a couple of days or whatever, and their sessions have expired because they closed their browser, but they still have their cookie files that are letting our site remember them. This code runs in that case. So you take their cookie file, because their sessions aren't set yet, and you set their sessions according to what the cookie file data is. And you can go ahead and sanitize that as you do it. Then you make those local variables that we need, log ID, log username, log password, out of their session data. So for instance, if you wanted to put the user's name, whoever's logged in, you want to show them their own name on a page, you can just echo this variable to a page. And you don't have to echo all this. So that's why I just put it into local PHP variables. Or if you want to ever evaluate their user ID or their username, you can just use these local variables. And you can make yours really short if you want. Mine are only long local variable names because I want you guys to really understand what it represents. But you can have this say HYE if you want, or B. Something really short and small. It doesn't matter, just as long as you remember what it's for. So after we get their sessions established again, then we can run that eval logged user function again to give us a true value here if the user authenticates OK. And then finally in the bottom here you say if the user OK is equal to true, that means they're authenticated, and you want to update their last login time field, because if they're coming back from 2 weeks later, they haven't visited your site in 2 weeks, you want to make sure that your system updates that last, so your other users know when was the last time he had come back or she had come back to visit the site. Because if you don't update that, it'll say their last login is whatever 30 days ago or whatever, but they might have been at your site 5 days ago. So that's why it would help you if you want to keep track of that better. And that's basically it. That's that whole file. And like I said, this file is mainly to give us a module that's going to start session and include a database connection into all of our pages, because almost every single page on your social networking website, you're going to have to evaluate the viewer that is viewing the page. You want to see if they are logged in or not, and you want to also know if they authenticate and match in the database with all their credentials. So that's what this file will be used for. Anytime you want to see if the user really authenticates and they are who they say they are supposed to be, you can just check this user OK variable in any of your pages. You just say if user OK equals true, then I can do this secure action. Okay, the last file that you're getting today is user.php. And this file we're going to be enhancing a little bit more later on. But right now I just wanted to give it to you so that way when your users log in, or when you're testing, when you log in successfully, you're navigated straight to this page. So basically down in the HTML there's nothing special going on. I'm just, for now, just outputting certain variables or information about the member that I gathered out of the database. And we gather it out of the database up here in the top. So the first thing we do in users.php is require once. You could also use include once right there. You just have to make sure that that page is where you think it is. So we're including once from the php includes folder the file called checkloginstatus.php. So you know exactly what all the code that we're including here does, because it's sitting right here. I just explained it. All that code's going to be included into your user.php script. Alright, so after that you can initialize any variables that might echo onto the page, because in some servers if you don't initialize the variables or they're not set at the top, if you try and echo them down in the HTML you could get an error. That's why it's handy to just initialize any variables that might echo to the page. So we're just establishing them with default values. Then we make sure that the get username variable is set, and then we sanitize it. So if I go to my profile, user.php u equals Adam, the user profile page knows what profile to display or what person to display from the database by this variable right here. So that's the variable that you're scooping up. It's a key value pair. The key is you and the value is Adam, or whatever the username might be. So you say if is set, get that username variable. Then you want to sanitize it and put it in a local variable called you. Else, if that get variable is not even set, you want to echo them, or just echo some error message to them, or header them away to the home page like I did here. Because that means somebody's tampering with the URL and they're removing variables that are supposed to be in the URL string. So this code would never execute unless somebody's being a doofus. Then you're going to use that variable, that incoming get variable, to select the member from the users table. So your SQL syntax reads select all from users where username equals you variable and activated equals 1. And I just added activated equals 1 just to make sure if this was 0 and they haven't activated yet, you don't want this page to render and their profile to display to other people, do you? If you do, you could just remove that. But if you don't, leave that in place. So you're selecting all of their information from the users table where the username matches up. Then you actually execute that query here and put it in a variable called the user query. Now we're going to make sure that the user exists in the table. So we can run MySQL numRows on that user query, and we get a variable called numRows that we can evaluate here in this if condition. We say if the numRows is less than 1, that means they don't exist. So you can echo out that user does not exist or is not yet activated. Press back and exit the script. Or you can header them somewhere or handle that any way that you like. So if they actually do exist, we're going to check to see if the viewer is the account owner. Because if the viewer who's looking at the page is the actual account owner that owns that page, you can do things like give them buttons that nobody else would see and other logic along those lines. So we create a variable called isOwner and we initialize it with a default value of no. Then we can simply run a condition that says if the uGet variable coming into the page is equal to log username, and you know that's their session username, and user OK is equal to true, then you can say isOwner equals yes. And then any other time down through this page where you want to say if isOwner equals yes, echo this special button just for him. You know what I'm saying? If isOwner equals yes, give him special thing because this guy owns this profile. Now here we can finally fetch all of the user data out of their row. So you're going to run a while loop over the MySQL fetch array function, and that gets packed into a variable called row. You can see in the MySQLi fetch array function, I'm feeding it 2 parameters. The first parameter is the user query. The second parameter is how I want this fetched array to be accessed. So you can set it to be accessed as an associative array, which I have here, or you can set it up to be an indexed array where this would be 0 and numbers down all through here instead of the actual label or title of the field. But I think it's just easier for beginners to grasp what they're selecting out of the database when they can see the actual title of the field in the database. So you select the ID, their gender, their country, their user level, sign up, blah blah blah, anything in the whole table that you want to select, and you put it into local variables here. And their join date and their last session date, I'm just using the string ftime function and the string toTime function to make those date strings in the database display the way I want them to on the page, like a human readable version of that date. And the last thing within the while loop, after we scoop up all that data out from all those fields, we say if the gender equals F, we're going to change sex from its default male up here to female, because in that case your user would be a female and you don't want to have that continue to say male. You want to change that to female, so that way down in the page where you echo their sex or their gender, you get the right output. Okay, so what you're doing here is you're getting these things ready to be displayed, or you can process them in your code, whatever. But at that point they're ready to use. We can echo them to the page or do whatever we want with them. And that's it. And like I said, there's a lot more that's going to be happening on this page, because they have to get options to adjust their profile. There's going to have to be buttons, so when other members come and they view this person's profile, they have a little link to friend with that person or block that person, and things like that. So this page is definitely going to get some more. We're not done with this one. Okay, so in this video we covered the login, the logout, understanding sessions and cookies and how to establish them to keep the user alive even if they close their browser, come back a week later, and establishing their profile page with the initial logic that it needs to display all kind of different users. And I'll see you guys in part 8.